Hi everyone and welcome to today's kitchen session, which is called Drones, Virtual and Augmented Reality in Research, Teaching and Learning. And it's going to be delivered by Dr. Servel Miller, who's Programme Leader for Natural Hazard Management within the Department of Geography and International Development here at the University of Chester. My name's Anna, I'm an HE advisor here at the uni and I'm joined by my colleagues Nikki and Hayley behind the scenes. Just to start by reassuring everyone that your video and audio aren't shared during the course of the session. I'm just going to explain how today will work, so I'll shortly hand over to Servel. During the presentation you can ask any questions you want in the chat function, which is on the right hand side of your screen. You can ask questions anonymously if you want to, so you just need to tick the box to say that you want to be anonymous. And you can also like other people's questions if you want to find out the answer to that too. So Servel will do the session and then Nikki will ask all your questions at the end. Okay, so I think that's everything and now I'll hand over to Servel. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much and welcome to the kitchen session. Today the focus will be on drone mapping as well as augmented and virtual reality. I know there may be participants from school, so I'll focus towards the end about how such technology can be used in the classroom. So I'll go over in a minute before my drone takes off. So I'll just escape. Right. So as I mentioned, it's about drones, virtual reality, augmented reality in research, teaching and learning. I'm the program leader for the Natural Hazard Management program, as well as the master's program in flood risk assessment, modeling and engineering. Most of my research focused around natural hazard processes. So landslide assessment, coastal erosion, storm surge impact, flooding, both in the UK as well as in the Caribbean and Florida. And I just have to give a quick shout out to my colleagues, first of all, who I've worked with over a number of years, Alex Foster, Catherine Welch, Anthony Cliff, Dan Boss, who I've worked on a LTI project with. So thank you very much, but also to the Global Challenge Fund and LTI who have made this research possible. So the presentation today will focus on this technology, but also how it can be used in research and as well as teaching and learning. So I'll start off with landslide mapping and management. So I do quite a bit of mapping of landslide, both in tropical environment as well as lovely exotic North Wales, as well as on the Wirral. Landslides increasingly are becoming quite challenging issue. The one that's on my screen now, this is known as Judgment Cliff landslide, which is in Jamaica. So you can see the drone, you can see the landslide. It looks pretty small, but it's a massive landslide. It's probably the size of about 5 football fields together. So it's a massive landslide. It moved the whole plantation and village almost 5 kilometers downstream from its current location. So identifying these landslides, whether they're active, their extent, but also feeding that information into risk mapping is quite essential. So I'll speak about the mapping which I'm doing in the Caribbean as well as that in the UK. This is an example of the challenges of slope instability in the Caribbean. This is the Millbank landslide. And I don't know if you're able to make out where I'm standing. The little dots, if you can see my cursor, that's where I'm standing. That's where I've launched the drone from. So you can recognize the size of that landslide. Just to the north, there was a village there, which because of the landslide is absolutely no access anymore. And it's quite interesting. When I traveled about 4 hours to get to this landslide, I was determined I was not going to go back without mapping the landslide. Unfortunately, I could not launch the drone from above the landslide because of the thick vegetation. So I had to climb down to the base of the landslide, not the safest thing to do, hoping that it wouldn't start moving again. But the result is that we got fantastic imagery of the landslide, the active section, and we're able to map that in quite significant detail. You can see, for example, the track here, that was the old road that exists into that community. They've tried to get around the landslide itself, but the landslide keep moving, keep going back further, and hence, they've got to abandon the houses in that community. There's still the odd individual living there, but access is extremely poor. So slope instability is a challenge in a tropical environment like Jamaica. You've got steep slopes, deep weathered soil, heavy rainfall. You've got streams at the base. You can't see the stream, which is just to the left of the screen, which is undercutting these slopes. And where they're in close proximity to urban area, they can provide significant challenges. You've got loads of landslides as well along major fluvial channel, and this is an example. Getting access to these landslides, you can see the very thick vegetation in this instant. Getting to these could take significant time, but landslide in these cases, while they're not very close to the built environment, they've got, and you'll see in a minute, they've got the potential to create landslide dams, which when they breach, do have that potential to result in flooding downstream. So understanding where they are, monitoring them, on a regular basis, drone technology does provide that capability in terms of understanding them, monitoring, and using that in terms of risk analysis. So again, it doesn't look big, but you're looking at a landslide which is probably 150, 200 meters in length. And in terms of height, it's probably 100 meters probably. So they're quite massive. And if you get loads of these along a river bank, creating landslide dam, the impact can be quite devastating. So again, that's just another drone imagery of another landslide. But we do have quite significant geohazards here in the UK. The image, top middle, is earlier this week out in Thurston. So that's an area which I've started doing a bit of work on. So these two imagery, that's the Thurston cliff around 3 years ago when we mapped it initially. Earlier this week, there were walkers that got trapped in a landslide that they had to be dug out and rescued. So landslide is a problem, especially with climate change reactivating some of these older landslide, but also coastal erosion as we get more storm event undercutting these cliffs with glacial material, very soft material that's collapsing. And we've got some of the fastest eroding coastline anywhere in Europe. As evident as well, last week, even in Chester here, numerous area subjected to flooding, and using drone imagery to capture the extent of the flooding, it's a quick way to get that information, to get that flood footprint, and use that in terms of risk-based analysis. So, quite effective tool in capturing data quickly, effectively, and over a significant area, which in some cases, if it's quite dangerous terrain, you might not be able to access during that period. But also in terms of search and rescue, understanding the extent, depth, impact of flood is quite important. But where you've got critical infrastructure or assets, and I'm not promoting Smart Cam 3D. There are loads of others, and I've put, drone sense is another example. Flying over flooded area in real time, you can see what assets has been, inundated, what you need to do, direct search and rescue teams. So again, quite valuable, that side of disaster management. What's the end result? When you do all this mapping, it's creating risk-based output. For landslide, creating digital terrain models, that's essential, but mapping the whole area, recording all the landslides, understanding the factors contributing to creating slope instability, but also the trigger, whether it's undercutting of river, rainfall, earthquake, understanding that, putting that together and creating your landslide susceptibility or your risk map, then that can be used for planning purposes. And that's exactly what we're doing, especially in the Caribbean, working with local practitioners and geoscience organization. That's feeding in their decision making and hopefully their policy. And that will help in terms of land use planning, which reduces, well, at least you avoid high risk area, or if you're going to build in high risk area, what sort of infrastructure that's best for that area, or what level of building code you might need to ensure is implemented in those particular areas. So quite keen to map them, create that inventory, convert that to a risk-based map, use that for decision making, but working with local practitioners from the government of Jamaica. Hopefully some of them have joined into the talk as well today. And as we said, you know, part of my research, yes, is going out, doing all the risk-based mapping, but it's also about capacity building. So with local practitioners, you know, providing training in drone mapping, as you can see there, that's in a, you know, mapping in a quarry, that's providing training as well. And this goes back a couple of years ago, making sure they've got the tools as well as the skills in terms of risk mapping. And that's something hopefully after C19 I'll be able to go back and continue. I do some of that training virtually, but you know, it's better when you're face to face. But yes, research feeding into capacity building locally. And that brings me to augmented and virtual reality. And just, you know, some of you might know all of this. In augmented reality, users interact with the real world while digital content is added. So using, for example, my 360-degree camera, I'll capture imagery, or my stereo camera, I'll capture that imagery. Students who can't go to the Caribbean, as in the case now with field work, using that for them to interact with that environment almost in sort of real time. They can walk around and get a sense of different things. Virtual reality, that's more, it's all computer generated environment. You try to recreate that real life environment, and I'll show you an example later on. And you immerse the user in terms of feeling, seeing, interacting. It's almost giving them that first hand opportunity of visiting and interacting with that environment. VR, you know, you need a headset, and that presents a challenge which I'll speak about later on. Like Oculus, most of what I've got is Oculus Rift, Oculus Go in terms of what we use. And whilst I'm a keen researcher, you know, a lot of my teaching is informed by my research. So modules, for example, the second year G5010 module, which is a key part of the Natural Hazard Management program, the final year GIS and remote sensing module, which is available to both the Natural Hazard Management students as well as geography students, and the G7015 module, which is a master's course module as part of the flood risk modeling, assessment and engineering program. The drone as well as the VR AR is quite good, especially in the current environment where we can't do field work overseas. You know, we usually use it before in terms of preparing for field work, but increasingly using that for virtual field trip, giving students the opportunity to visit those sites without physically being there. And employability, it's an area that is growing, and giving students those skills, you know, increase their employability, and we're seeing that already on the master's program, but also using that for simulation exercises, virtual tour, and merging it with things, for example, Google Earth, which we, you know, at first year especially is quite easy to integrate it with other technology. So we try to expose those students to virtual augmented reality, whether that is understanding assets, mostly flood assets or utility assets that might be impacted by landslides or volcanoes or slope instability or flooding, but allow them to visualize an environment. And it's increasingly becoming a key tool in terms of disaster management, how to inspect asset, how to plan, how to design, you know, other uses, for example, solar, wind farm site analysis. And, you know, for those who are interested in transport or infrastructure, critical facility, especially when it comes to natural hazard management. So it's exposing students to these skills when they go in the workplace. You know, it does, or, you know, contribute to them being much more employable. And one of the simplest way in which we create augmented reality is with our Sandbox. So if you've visited the geography department before, you might have seen our Sandbox. It's a very simple box with sand, so, you know, you can have a play whenever the C19 crisis goes. And you can see on the left, you know, as you interact with that environment, that's a flooded environment which we create. Then you're able to understand a bit more about hydrology, how, you know, rivers may flow, but it's more an engaging tool than helping you to understand quite complex theories about fluvial processes and hydrology generally. It's not very expensive. You do need what we call a sharp throw projector. You need a little box of a certain dimension. You need the software, which is free, which is Linux, and you need the old Connect, which I think they've stopped making them, but you can get one quite cheaply for 200 quid. But it's a powerful, engaging tool, and you know, if you can set that one up, you know, students do get quite enthusiastic about it. But preparing for field program, and that's an example. That's Flo, who graduated last year. You know, it could range from very extensive VR equipment to the old anaglyphs glasses. That's the cyan and red glasses which you can put on. The image top middle looks a little bit blurry, but when you put those glasses on, you can actually, you know, students can walk around the classroom and explore that environment in 3D, you know, understand the different parts of that landslide, where there are features, for example, tension cracks. So giving them that environment, that opportunity to enjoy that environment, understand it, you know, prepare them for field work before they go. The image at the bottom, hopefully that's because we can't go over to Naples this year. You know, that imagery is underneath a city that was buried by volcano. And, you know, as part of the natural hazard management program, we go explore. We're actually in the old church and the old buildings underneath the new city, basically. But giving students that experience before they go is quite important. The image on the right, again, that's in the UK, looking at natural flood management, you know, providing that opportunity to explore those places, you know, before fieldwork is quite good. And again, giving them the training when they go in the field, you know, they get to use a drone. Again, that's out of turf system, which I showed you earlier, which those walkers got trapped earlier this week, giving students that opportunity to use the mapping equipment. So hopefully when they go in the workplace, they've got those skills already. Using 360-degree imaging, you know, we have got a number of 360-degree cameras in the department. So training up students on those skills and how you can input that information in a virtual environment. So we create loads of tours. As I said, especially with the current situation, that has become quite handy. And there are a number of software out there, for example, Tinkling, which you can use. There's Sketchfab. So quite a number of different software, but the whole idea is to share that information where students can access it quite easily and interact with it. But also you might be able to see where I've got that little card, and I've got quite a few of them. So love volcano. The opportunities when we go out in the field, I could give the students a little card and send them to a site. So when they scan that with a phone, you know, it comes alive and they can understand, they can walk around, they can pause their video, etc. So using that, you know, in terms of engaging students, help them to slow down, help them to see features which they might have walked past, you know, is quite valuable in terms of teaching as well as learning. And you find students do engage with a site, you know, much more when they've got these additional tools to work with. But also to say that you don't always have to use, you know, the resources that I create. I'm not a programmer, and I don't think I'll ever be a programmer again. I've lost those skills. But there's data, there are resources out there which you can readily use in the classroom. Once you've got, you know, a headset, and you've got cheap Google Cardboard headset, which you can get for a couple of quid, or a little bit more expensive one that you can put your camera in for about £10. Or if you've got the resources, you go for example, the Oculus Go, which, you know, loads of platform that's, you know, hosting virtual reality, augmented reality. This one is from Japan. They use it for training. The UN use it for training, where kids in flood-prone areas can experience what it's like to be flooded. You know, you go in that environment and you can feel the water coming up, and, you know, how would you respond? What would you do? Or if you're driving through that flood, you know, well, which you shouldn't, you know, it's giving you that environment, that feeling before you actually, you know, experience that. But it raises awareness in terms of what you need to do and prepare for disasters. I said, working with industry, this is an example from WSP International. And again, if you've got a virtual reality headset, you can look at this. It's fantastic in terms of, getting community to engage with a proposed development, in this case, a flood defense. What do they want to see in the flood defense? What they don't want to see, where they want different walls or features to go. It's quite important in terms of community engagement. So AR, VR, is a fantastic tool for the classroom, whether it is for students to travel and explore places all over the world. They could get them to experience different careers firsthand, whether that's medicine or, transport planning. It is quite a valuable tool. It's very good for engaging students, but you just have to be careful sometimes when you're trying to engage students, because students will have it and say, oh, that's great. You have to build it around a whole series of activities, use it as a tool. It's not just something, oh, watch a movie, but it's excellent for engaging, for community, student understanding. I've seen where they've used it to kids to understand what the elderly experience in a care home. So engaging with these different community or people who have suffered the impact of disaster is quite a valuable tool, develop that empathy with students. For medicine, I've seen where they've used it to explore the human body. So quite a wide use in terms of what VR can do and help students to experience. So a number of tools, and hopefully you can click on those links. In the meantime, if you're a physical geographer, Arden survey is quite good, but do click in some of those links if you're interested in creating a virtual tour. The Tingling is quite good. You can get a free subscription, or you can pay for one if you'd like. It gives you a little bit more functionalities. So quite a valuable tool. There are apps out there. You don't have to go and invest quite significantly in new equipment. You can just use existing resources that's there. So what's needed? If you're going to go, high tech, you need gaming computers, you need software, you need Oculus, you need a headset. Increasingly, there are standalone headsets which are becoming affordable. I got a few recently for around £300, but if you have a classroom with 20, the costs do add up. But the price is coming down. There are challenges, as I mentioned before, around resources, having enough headset, costs, training. Staff needs to be training VR and the content expertise. The technology does change quite rapidly, so keeping up with those changes is important. But there's also health and safety. Not every student can use the technology. If you suffer from motion sickness or that could disadvantage some students. You have to plan around that. What activity will you give those students? But as I said, currently you can use on mobile phones quite easily with some of the cheap headset. So quite a valuable tool in the classroom. And again, on the right, there are a number of different apps which you can use. I'm not trying to promote those apps, but there are loads of other apps for geography, but it's quite interacting. It allows students to engage with the environment, preparing for field work, has the potential to greatly transform learning experience, but also enhance employability skill. So it's a key part of what we do here at the University of Chester in the geography department, in the undergraduate program, both geography as well as natural hazard management, as well as the master's program on flood risk assessment. If you're interested in those, the links are there and should be in the chat as well. So quite a valuable tool. I do enjoy it. I've turned a hobby in a serious research, but also helping in terms of teaching and learning and feedback from students. The project, the LTI funded project, which I did with Daniel Boss, which hopefully will be published soon, shows that students do engage, they evaluate, it motivate them to learn, but there are challenges that needs to be addressed, and hopefully over a period of time, we'll be able to address some of those challenges. From a research perspective, fantastic tool. Very good for gathering data, especially in hazardous environment, but use that in decision making, helping in planning, informing policy, especially in Caribbean countries. So that's the end of my talk. if you want to see some of the kit, one was behind me earlier and fell down, one of my drones. But yes, if you want to learn a little bit more about some of the kits I've got, I'm happy to tell you about that. But yes, that's a quick overview of the research with drones as well as VR and augmented reality, but most importantly, how it informs teaching and how you can use it for those teachers here or students, how you can use that in the classroom quite readily. So thank you very much, and I will hand back over. And if you've got a question, you're most welcome.
Thanks, Servel. Thank you. That was really, really interesting. I just I've got a few questions that have come in previous to the this event. One of them is do you see a big difference between the lower end kit and the high end kit in terms of outputs? Is it very different, or is it worth the money?
It's worth the money. As a research tool, it's worth the money. As a classroom tool, not really. I think the students are not students. You know, if you can interact with the environment, that's good enough. So some of the Google Cardboard, they're just as good as some of the high-end kit. Okay. For master's level, I would say you go for the high-end kit if you can. Okay,
that's good to know. So what are the challenges of using VR for teaching as well? That's another question that's come in.
One of the biggest challenge is costs. If you're going to go for the cheap stuff, the little headset, they're quite fiddly because you've got to get the students to put their phone in those headsets, so that could be quite challenging. But if you're going to get standalone headset or you're going to rent them, the cost could be quite significant. So there is a cost implication there. There's also, probably a third of your students won't be able to use VR because they suffer from motion sickness, as an example, or there are other existing medical conditions. So you have to think about how you're going to engage those students to ensure, they're not disadvantaged.
Really?
You also have to be aware that students do get bored quite quickly. So don't give them a headset and say, watch a movie. After about 10 minutes, they'll say, wow, and it's great, but they get bored after, 15 minutes. But if you put that in terms of very short activity, so they're using it as just as they use any other tool in the lab, then it works, much more effectively in that manner. So you see, for example, the small card, which I had earlier on, if I can find an example and you can see. So these small little cards, I give them, they can interact with that, they go on the site, they use it, they can go back home, they can scan it if they have an assignment, remind them of things. That works. So you have to integrate that in, wider learning than just, whoa, this is great, watch it.
Okay, that's great. Another question, how receptive are students to using drones for research projects at a postgraduate level? Are there any barriers to doing that?
They're extremely, at a master's level especially, using the new technology, and we've got a number of students who have done research project using drones. However, as a university, there are risk assessment issues that needs to be addressed. There are training issues just to make sure they're adhering to all the regulations. So you've got to monitor. So there are some barriers in terms of that. There's also the barrier of, do you give a master's student a kit that's worth 20 grand? So, there are questions there. Sorry to say, I've crashed a few drones, and, the drones, crashing the drone it's okay. They're quite robust, but damaging the payload, the camera, yes, you're not going to readily replace those. So there are issues there. There are barriers about, can you trust students? And yes, I can trust my student, but accidents do happen. And, staff may have to go with the student just to ensure they're adhering to what's in their risk assessment.
Okay. Risk assessments and insurance, it sounds like.
Yes.
Last question, what is required and the sort of cost is involved in setting your augmented reality sandbox? So that was a sandbox you showed us earlier. So how much does that cost and what do you need to set it up? I think you did run through it briefly, didn't you?
Yeah. So the first thing you do, you need a gaming computer or laptop, and these go for about 1,200 for a decent one. You need a short throw projector, which is about £600. You need the Connect, which is, you can get one quite cheaply for £200, and you need a box. So you're looking at roughly £2,000 there to set it up.
Okay, So if a school wanted to do that, they could do if they had the budget. Is it pretty robust?
It is extremely robust. You might need somebody in your computing department that knows a little bit about Linux, because that's the operating system that it uses. The code is freely available online. So if you type in AR Sandbox, you'll just see the code that, there's a page that tells you the dimension for the box, how to use the code, and that's it.
That's great. Well, thanks ever so much. That's all our questions. I don't think there's any more that have come in. Oh no, have we got one more question? How has the current pandemic affected your teaching practices at the University of Chester? Has COVID driven you to using virtual online research techniques as an alternative to fieldwork?
Yeah, well, it has become quite a valuable tool. Luckily, over a number of years, I've been collecting imagery. So not knowing that there would have been COVID-19, just because I like creating virtual tours. So it has become quite useful in terms of teaching. We have to do all our field course, or at least, earlier in September, we could have, we could do a few field courses. Now we've got to do it all virtually. So that's become extremely useful. But I think it has forced me to be even more innovative in terms of how we create these virtual environments and thinking beyond not just some of the AR, VR stuff, but there are loads of other virtual field trip programs out there. So it has forced me to become much more innovative, and hopefully that will enhance teaching in the future, whether we go on those field courses or not.
And a virtual field trip, is that where one person goes on the field trip on their own and then that's virtually beamed to everybody else, or is that everybody is virtual on that?
No,
is it mixed with the two?
It works in a number of ways. So you're right, because I can say, like my students are due to go out to Italy, and where there is, for example, a tour in a church, that church which I show you, which is on the ground, they can actually present and do that virtual presentation. But it's a little bit more than that. It is, you can use the VR set and you can actually walk in that environment. The tingling, which is in the presentation, if you click on that, you can move to different places. That's an example from North Wales that Dr. Welsh did. You can just click on those different things, which you can interact their information there. You can walk around that community. So you can do that as a whole team. There's also, the little glasses, which I showed you earlier on, where in the classroom, or you can project things on the screen and they can actually interact with that environment in 3D.
That's very good. I don't think there's any more questions. I think we have reached an end there. Thanks ever so much for your time and for everybody who was tuned in. It was really interesting. I'll pass you back to Anna now, and I think she's going to end the meeting.
Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much, Servel. Really interesting presentation. Thank you, and really interesting to see all the different technologies that you can get involved in. I just put the links there on the chat for the undergraduate and the postgraduate course, so do take a look at those. Also, just to let you know that we've got a big back catalogue of kitchen session lectures on loads of different subjects, and we've got more coming up as well, so I've put the link there to join if you want to book onto any more of those. But thank you everyone for watching today. Thanks to Servel, and goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.